And let's go over who's responsible for providing FAPE, or free and appropriate public education. So consider this scenario. You have a student on your caseload who has made little or no progress after years of special education. Her IEP contains vague, subjective goals and objectives, and the parents are requesting a more intensive program. So what I want you to think about as we're going through FAPE, if this case were to go to due process, is the school liable for not providing an appropriate education? Or is it the responsibility of the parent because the parent signed the IEP? That's the question to think about. So there are several factors that are operating when an IEP team refuses a parent's requests for more intensive special education programs. First is school personnel. Frequently, school personnel view themselves as the experts on educating all children. Also, we've got administration, and administrators don't want to reimburse parents for services from a provider in the private sector, like perhaps an ABA-trained therapist or an academic tutor. And then we've also got the history that IEP teams experience. IEP teams often deny requests, and they may actually blame families for having unrealistically high expectations for the child. Some IEP teams do approve parental requests for more intensive programs. So under IDEA, children with disabilities are entitled to FAPE, or a free appropriate public education. But who's responsible for providing the free appropriate public education, and how is it delivered? That's what we'll look at here. So let's go to the law. If you click on this link later, it'll take you to the IDEA law. But the IDEA is the law that provides children with disabilities the right to a free appropriate public education, or FAPE. But the purpose, the thing to focus on, the purpose of the IDEA is to ensure, this is a quotation, to ensure that all children with disabilities have available to them a free appropriate public education that emphasizes special education and related services designed to meet their unique needs and prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. And that's the language that comes directly from the law. So when we think about that, we have to actually look at that purpose, not just the statement of a FAPE, but the purpose of it. The purpose is the actual mission statement of IDEA. When we develop, when we review, when we revise a child's individualized education program, we should always be rereading that purpose of IDEA. And the questions we need to ask are, is the IEP designed to meet the child's unique needs? And will the goals in this IEP prepare the child for further education, employment, or independent living? So we always want to revisit that. And then we want to look also at educational benefit. Now, courts have held that to receive a free appropriate public education, the child must receive meaningful education benefit. Now, this is still intentionally vague language on the part of the law, so there's room for some discussion and investigation analysis on what that meaningful education benefit looks like. The courts have also held that while children with disabilities are entitled to a FAPE, to be clear, they're not entitled to the best education, nor an education that maximizes a child's potential. And that's really key to understand what special education is for. So how do you know if your students are receiving this meaningful educational benefit? So we're actually going to go and look at some tests. But we use objective information from tests that measure the child's knowledge and skills. It's important that school professionals and parents learn about the tests and what those tests measure and don't measure. We want to understand what the bell curve is and what the test means. So if you click on this link later, it's going to take you to a brief discussion or brief article about what tests measure and what they don't measure. And that's really important for parents and professionals to understand. And we also want to be careful about these vague goals and objectives. We've all seen, and perhaps some of us have even written, IEP goals that are vague and subjective. This is unfortunately not unusual. In special education litigation, schools often attempt to defend poorly written IEP goals by claiming that the parent fully participated in the IEP process and that the parent agreed to those vague goals and objectives. But in 1982, we've got a Supreme Court law. The Supreme Court saw Board of Education, Hendrick Hudson School District versus Amy Rowley, And here's where we get some definition of that free, appropriate public education. So if you haven't read about this yet in the text, you'll want to look at this. This is a really exciting case about a student who could be doing better with more support, but the Supreme Court said that the student was not entitled to the best education or even an education that would have her meet her potential, just an adequate one. So go back and look at this. You can click on this link, that'll take you here, but go back and look at that in the text. But the key for that, when we talk about meaningful educational benefit, was improved outcomes, not the best outcomes, just improved ones. So some courts still cite the Rowley decision, and the legal landscape is changing. We had No Child Left Behind in 2001 that said states have to have high academic standards for all children, and we have to test all of those children to see if they're meeting the standards. Then we had the reauthorization of IDEA in 2004, and then we kind of shifted from access to the schoolhouse and in compliance with procedures to improved outcomes. We wanted to see that growth for children who received special education services. But our most recent case, and this is really important, so you'll want to click on this link and look at that, the Andrew F. versus Douglas County. This was recent in 2017. Justice Roberts says that the Supreme Court didn't reverse the Rowley decision or the Rowley standard, but if a child isn't fully integrated into the general classroom, the focus on FAPE shifts even more to the unique circumstances of the child. So you should definitely read this. But this Andrew case, and I'll send you some other links about the Andrew case. This Andrew case really emphasizes that students have to make progress in special education. We can't just put them in there. So you'll want to look at that. So who's responsible for providing that FAPE, that free appropriate public education? It's the school. The school is responsible for providing the student with the free appropriate public education. And the IEP is that roadmap that describes how the school will provide students with disabilities with a FAPE. So that's why it's so important that those IEPs are written well. And then just the kind of last thing, when a child is performing below grade level and the student receives specialized instruction, the IEP team develops goals to close the gap. This comes from the policy guidance from OSERS. That's our Office of Special Education and Rehabilitation Services at the highest level, at the federal level. So these are things to really focus on as we go through and as we're going through these different cases and these laws. So I want to click back to this very first slide again. If this case goes to due process, is the school liable for not providing an appropriate education, or is it the responsibility of the parent? And I hope that what you've realized is that it's the school's responsibility, and that really falls down to us as intervention specialists to do that correctly. So more information to come, and have a great weekend. Enjoy reading this. There's really rich reading this week. Okay, thanks.